crack on with the slides. So we don't have a huge amount. So yeah, fun enough, this is our first ever, I think, all leaders meeting that I can certainly remember in the district. So
Yeah.
it's certainly our first ever virtual all leaders meeting. So what have we got? So quick introduction, which we'll crack on to in a minute. I hope you can see the screen. Then we have got a bit on restarting face-to-face scouting, a bit on risk assessments and activity notifications, a bit on other news, and then there'll be time for questions at the end. Do feel free to post a question in the chat if you wish. We'll try and pick those up at the end, or you can obviously just ask them live at the end. But as they always say on the HQ briefings, your question might be answered during the briefing, so do feel free to hold it back. Okay, so I suppose, yeah, quick introduction. So it's been a slightly crazy 6 months, certainly for scouting for the whole world. And obviously it's a new term, new scouting term this week. So Heather and I thought it would probably be a good idea to catch up with as many of our section leaders as possible, just to talk them through a few of the big things that are going on. You know, there's always something going on in scouting, even away from COVID. But we thought, yeah, it's probably a good idea to just catch up and talk through a couple of the major things. If we don't mention something that you're maybe thinking we should talk about, once again, just chuck that at the end into the question box and we can try and pick that up live or get back to you. Firstly, just like to say thank you for everyone that is still here. You know, it's been an incredibly tough period for us, those people that are used to hitting our section meetings once, twice, 3 times a week, depending on how lucky we are, to have that cancelled for 6 months. And I appreciate some of you might be out of work, some of you might be furloughed, some of you might have lost relatives to COVID, or you know, be homeschooling primary age children for the last 5 months, which personally I wouldn't wish that on anyone. I mean, I was my children are teenagers, so homeschooling for me was relatively straightforward, you know. But yeah, so if you have primary age children and you homeschooled them for 5 months, then I think you deserve a medal. It also means, I guess, you'd be an amazing Beaver Cub or Scout leader, which is fantastic. Okay, so restarting face-to-face scouting. Just to warn you, some of the slides look like they've got a lot of text. I've tried to kind of break it down, but as of, I think, late July, some of the literature started to come out regarding face-to-face scouting, restarting it. But we wanted to kind of talk through the process, talk through where we are, because not everyone is possibly in a position to restart, or maybe isn't quite sure what the process is. So we wanted to just kind of talk through that. It's not in an incredible amount of detail because we'd be here all evening.
Yes, and Ben, we also know that some people here tonight are sort of more fully immersed in this than others. So we're sort of trying to bridge. So bear with us if this is all stuff you already know. I mean, we are covering a few other things in the meeting too, but you can maybe helpfully chip in at some point if others have questions.
Of course, yeah. So in terms of where we are, and this isn't specifically Ealing and Hanwell, but HQ, so we're at readiness level amber. So in case you're not aware, back in June, July, whenever it was, the National Youth Agency, which is a charity that the government have kind of nominated to be the organisation that manages returning to normal for the youth sector. So it's not just Scouts, it's DFE, it's Girl Guiding, Boys Brigade, all those type of organisations. So the NYA manages that process and liaises with the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, which is the government department that manages Scouts in the youth sector. So it's not the Department of Education. So I know there was some confusion back in July, I think it was, when the Department of Education put some news out and everyone was like, oh, is that us? And no, it's not Scouts. It's the DCMS, that is the government department that manages the youth sector. So yeah, there's 4 readiness levels, and we're now at readiness level amber. Now, until the 3rd of September, amber just meant you could do outdoor scouting, but as of the 3rd of September, HQ, or the National Youth Agency, changed the definition of amber. So amber now means that scouting can meet indoors it encourages outdoors, so it says preferably you would be outdoors, but it does allow you to get back to face in scouting indoors, with group size of 15 and some other definitions. I won't go through all the definitions here, but I'm going to show you where to get that information if you want more detail, but I won't drown you in detail, as I appreciate probably 2/3 of you know this, so you don't need to hear it again. So yeah, so we're currently at amber. Now the next point is really important. So scouting, it does the standard or the general government COVID rules do not apply to scouting. So when you see things, obviously that was announced today about group sizes of 6 and what have you, that currently doesn't apply to scouting, and the general government rules don't apply to scouting anyway. Clearly there is an expectation that the increasing of lockdown that's announced today may come through to scouting, but as it currently stands today, and as of about half an hour ago I checked on the HQ website, there's no change. So we're still at amber, we can still meet indoors, the group sizes are still 15, but yes, obviously that might change, or it might be changing now for all we know. But yeah, so when you see those general government announcements saying, oh, we're going back into lockdown, Scouts is cancelled, all these kind of things, by and large, you can ignore that unless you actually get something from either Heather or myself, or you go onto the HQ website. You know, there was a lot of stuff on Facebook last night about, oh, that's it, we're going back into lockdown. You can kind of ignore all of that. Unless you see something from this guy called Graham Hamilton, who is one of the chief commissioners from HQ, but as a general rule, try not to get sucked into the kind of the Facebook, oh my God, it's the end of scouting. So what this basically means is that groups and sections are permitted to resume face-to-face scouting. Now my next slide will go into a bit more detail about that. So if your section wants to resume, and I appreciate some of you have done this, you need to put together a COVID risk assessment. I've abbreviated risk assessment to RA. So yeah, you have to put a COVID specific risk assessment together, which has to be approved or checked by your either executive or whoever your group executive nominates. And then it has to be passed to district to actually approve it. There is a specific email address that we ask you to email the district, and then once we've kind of sanity checked it, there's a formal process on the website. Once I'm going to show you that in a second.
Yeah, can I chip in, Ben, just to say, maybe you already said it, sorry, I was responding to a chat question. The process of a section leader doing the first draft, and then the next bit is checking that with their GSL and their exec, and it's only after that checking phase has happened that it's sort of signed off at group level that it then gets sent to us, and we have a sort of a pre-check system, which means that we can have a bit of a friendly sort of to and fro of sorting out any tweaks before it goes through the official portal, because we don't like having to do the official portal approval declined, because that sort of seems very disheartening. So we'd rather sort of sort out anything helpful that we can assist with before you send it through the portal, and at that stage then you'll know that it's going to be a thumbs up.
Yes, I mean the process that HQ define is that it's the section leader that writes it, but obviously as a group that's kind of up to you. So you know, obviously the idea is section leaders that does it, submits it to the group scout leader, chair, exec, whatever's nominated. But yes, you know, as a group, it's kind of up to you.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
As long as the exec is approving it and they've nominated a person.
Exactly, and they can have as long as they have a separate checker from the person who drafts it. So for example, if it was the GSL who was very involved in drafting it, then get your exec chair or secretary or somebody to be involved in having that second pass.
Yeah, and so far we've had 4 groups that have put in risk assessments that we've approved. So in terms of the 10 groups we've got, doesn't cover every section, so I think 2 of those groups have had risk assessments for all 3 sections, others it's only partial. So yes, that's in terms of where we are for Ealing and Hanwell. And then I think the key point that HQ are making really clear that obviously Heather and I want to reiterate is that each section and each leader, you know, only resume when they're ready to do so, but it is important as an organisation, as a district, that we do our best to get back to some kind of normality. But, you know, each leader has to be comfortable with meeting face to face. Clearly, every adult has got their own health, what's the word, situations, you know, in terms of, you know, whether they've got any own conditions or their family or what have you. So it's very much up for each adult. And that is part of the risk assessment process. So it is consulting with the section leaders, you know, over when you start back. This isn't something that either HQ or Heather and I or Richard, the county commissioner, are saying you must start back. What we want is there to be as much movement getting back to some kind of normality as possible. Even that means that maybe there's shared sections. So rather than it being the cubs have got back and the bee, you know, maybe you share some nights, so you have a joint beaver and cub night or whatever. But yeah, we want to do as much as we can to get back to normal, partly because the young people need it, and partly because HQ is very concerned that, you know, like all of these organizations, that scouting might not be the same when we get out from the other side. So yeah, so we want to do the best that we can to get back, but it is completely up to each group and each section. So let me just hop on to the next slide. So what I've done is I've filmed a small video. So if you don't know anything about getting back, I'm going to play a video. I think it's about 45 seconds, showing the HQ website and essentially kind of where you need to go and what it looks like. I appreciate some of you are going to be horribly familiar with this, and it's not the largest, but I will just play it so you can see. So essentially, this is the main summary page for. Let's just check display. Hold on. You will see the mouse moving once it's out. Yeah. So this is the main summary page that talks about getting everyone together safely. There's a little bit of text at the top about the recent changes. And if you scroll down, you will find, see, I'm scrolling on my video slower than I'm talking. So you'll find a whole bunch of sections there at the bottom about things like the program. And then there's a link there, which is guidance for leaders specifically. And then I will just pause it a second. Once you go to that page, there's a video. You can see it there called Let's Give It a Go. I think it's about a 10-minute video that talks about what you need to do. And then if you scroll down a little bit more, so I'll play the video again, there's a whole bunch of links. So there's a COVID risk assessment template, and there's other links as well. And then once you're ready with your risk assessment, there's a submit to HQ. And you also see there the readiness levels. So if you click on that blue box in the top right hand corner where it says discover the readiness level in your area, it will tell you what England is at the moment. And as I said, as about half an hour ago, it still said that England was at amber and what have you. There are some bits of England that are red, as we know, local spikes in coronavirus which have impacted. So, you know, that's good to kind of keep an eye on that page. Although obviously, should things change, we will notify section leaders and group scout leaders. But essentially go to the Getting Everyone Back Safely page, and there's loads of guidance, and it will help you understand what you need to do in as easy way as possible. And then what I'm just going to do is I've got a slide which is just some of the lessons we've learned. So we are 4 weeks or whatever in. So there's a district panel of approvers, which is Heather and myself, Jonathan, the district chair, and some other leaders in the district. So we're meeting roughly every week, and these are some of both the things that the guidance says and some things we've learned. So you don't have to meet face to face every week. That's a really key thing. So if you do feel like you're ready to get back to face scouting, nothing says it has to be every week. You know, so do it fortnightly, do it monthly, whatever kind of works within your group, because doing this is harder than normal scouting. So don't, you know, like I said a few minutes ago, some face-to-face scouting is great if we can resume that, but if you only do it once a month, or if you only do it fortnightly, then that's you know, if that's the most that you as a section leader team can do, that's absolutely fine. Continue to plan blended scouting. Blended scouting essentially means, you know, continue with a virtual program. we don't have to be rocket scientists to realize that we're probably going to go back into some kind of lockdown, so face-to-face scouting isn't going to be allowed. So, you know, keep that program where you're doing your sessions, you know, even if you're not using it, kind of have it in mind. The first virtual Facebook group is still going. Keep the COVID risk assessment and your normal risk assessment separate. So when you put your COVID risk assessment together, just do the specific stuff to deal with the coronavirus. Don't mix up the normal risks. Slight obvious, review the relevant guidance. Use the HQ template. You know, once again, this is something we see on Facebook, people talking about, there's always experts on Facebook who go, well, I'm in health and safety, and why aren't they doing this kind of risk assessment? You know, why do they not have scoring or grading systems? Just keep it simple. You know, so don't try and complicate both your own lives as section leaders and Heather and mine and the rest of the approvers by making it more complex. Keep to the simple HQ template. If you work in a high-risk environment, you know, and you do lots of risk assessments, it might not be as rigorous as what you're used to, but it's absolutely fine for scouting in terms of what we're doing. Watch the video. So yeah, the video talks you through what you need to do. And then most risk assessments we've received have been 2 to 3 sides long. So if you're putting your risk assessment together and it's 5, 6, 7, 8 sides long, then you've probably gone into too much detail and you've probably put either too many risks, or you're looking at things which don't need to be put in the risk assessment. They're kind of coming out 2 to 3 sides long. You know, which obviously is not an exact science, you know, but broadly speaking, if you're around that, you know, you're probably doing okay. But yes, like I said, if it's 7, 8, 9 sides, then you know, then maybe you're looking at things which don't need to be looked at. And keep it simple. That's the key thing. You know, we know that young people aren't particularly vulnerable. So obviously we need to ensure that we're protecting their parents when we go home and our section leaders. But you know, yeah, just keep it simple. Have I missed anything there, Heather?
No, I think that's fairly covered it. But I mean, if people, has anybody spotted anything that you think we should have included, or a question that's left hanging?
Is there a template for the other bit you have to hand in yet?
Not for the action plan. Yeah, so that's one thing that I actually missed off this. So that you've nudged my mind, Ben. So thank you. So the HQ guidance requires that you submit both the risk assessment and an action plan. The risk assessment is exactly what it sounds like. The action plan is a little bit more about, well, how are you going to meet safely? So it's not about mitigating the risk, it's the practicalities of, you know, what's your program going to look like? How have you consulted with your parents? How have you consulted with your section leaders? Now, unfortunately, HQ haven't put together a template for the action plan. So though they say you have to submit an action plan, there's no file that is currently in place. What some groups have done that have come to us is send us a separate Word document where they talk through their action plan. Some groups have added it as the last page after the risk assessment. Some groups have made comments at the top of the risk assessment, so there's been a bit of a mix. But whatever we get does need to also touch on the practicalities of what you're doing. So if all you do is talk about the risks and there's no kind of practical of, well, so for example, when I talk about practical, it's, you know, some examples of program activities you're going to do that are going to be COVID secure. So we don't need your program, we don't need every week, but we want some examples of the kind of things you're going to be doing that are COVID safe. But we don't, like I said, we don't need everything listed. We just want to know that you are thinking about those activities. And for example, you've thought about how you're going to keep things clean. So if you're doing an activity where you're using scissors, have you thought about how you're going to make the scissors safe if they're being passed between the young people? Doesn't mean you can't use scissors. You know, the guidance says try and avoid using shared equipment, But if your program needs you to use shared equipment, how are you going to keep those things clean between people? You know, are you going to dump it in a bucket of Milton fluid? Are you going to wipe it with an anti-bac wipe? You know, are you going to leave it in a box for 7 days? You know, whatever is your technique for allowing that equipment to be used. But the action plan does need to touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, Ben, can I jump in with another couple of examples on that? I mean, because we're working to what's called the approvers checklist, it does ask us to look for things, and as Ben says, some of those things that we've been asked to look for are not on the risk assessment template. So it's understandable if some groups didn't realize that they were supposed to, and we have started quite freely to send people who want to look at it, what, you know, the approvers checklist, what you're going to get measured against, basically. One of the aspects of that which relates to the program is an undertaking that what you're aiming for is quality scouting. So I mean, it's a big ask, but we're just looking for that mentality, that sort of, that, you know, we know that we've got to take it slowly, and we know that we can't start doing whistles and bells from the beginning, and we've got to adapt everything. So yeah, absolutely start gradually, but within the view of, why are we doing this? Is it just because we are desperate to get back face to face, but it doesn't really matter what we do when we get back to face? No, that's not enough. It has to be something which is actually feeding in to what scouting is supposed to be for, and the top awards as part of that. Does that sound okay? Yeah.
Yeah, so, and Millie, that's a valid point. We will share the approver checklist, so that you know, it's not a secret document or anything. So we're happy to share that. And
yeah,
we just work through it in every session.
Yeah, it's on the website, so anybody can download it.
I'll send the slides out afterwards, and then we can send some of the links in terms of the approver checklist. You know, and if you are starting from scratch, excuse me, you haven't got anything yet, you know, we don't mind sharing some examples of what we've had and what we've approved. You know, HQ have been very clear, they don't just want it to be a copy and paste thing. But, you know, if you are a bit stuck and you just quite literally don't know where to start, then if you email the DC address, then Heather and I can share, you know, an example of one for your section, so you can kind of get a feel for what we're accepting and what we're seeing. As long as you don't just change the name at the top and send it right back, because then you know, HQ have certainly made that clear. But yes, as we say, you know, this is just about doing the best that you can to get back to face-to-face scouting in a way that is safe for the adults, and, you know, delivers the best quality scouting that we can under these circumstances. But yes, if it's once a month, that's great. If it's fortnightly, that's great. And I think I might have it on one of the last slides, but yesterday, I think it was, we had our risk assessment for the Stoke Poges Walter Davis campsite approved. So that is, as of yesterday, reopened for bookings. So you can even use the district campsite for your section meetings. Clearly, you're not going to do that on a Monday night, because, you know, no one's going to drive for half an hour to Stoke Poges to do their session. But if you wanted to move your meetings to maybe a Saturday morning, and do it fortnightly, monthly, whatever works for you, then there's nothing to stop you booking one of the fields, or booking the activities, you know, that are available, and then running your section meeting there. That's absolutely fine, and we'd almost encourage that if it works for you. So yeah, so do consider that, as long as that works for you. So let's just go on to the next slide. Let's just so questions. The Stoke Poges risk assessment is not on the camp's website yet, not the COVID one. I'm happy to add it to the what do you call it? So I'll just add. That's a really good question, Howard, about charging. To be honest with you, we've got a district exec tomorrow, so Howard's asked, you know, do sections need to pay for using the campsite? It's not something we've discussed. We've got a district exec tomorrow, so I'll raise it. I mean, obviously if you're booking the activities, then there would be a cost. If you're just using the field, then you know, we can discuss that and see. But obviously we don't want the finances to be a blocker when we want people to be out and using the campsites, but we can certainly ask that. Do all sections in a group need to submit together? So no, so one section can restart whilst the other two stop, or not stop, continue with just virtual scouting. You can submit all your sections as one risk assessment as long as there is some consideration for the differences between the age group. It's obviously much easier to socially distance scouts than it is beavers. So, you know, the risk assessment doesn't need to see that or doesn't need to show it, but you can still just do one document. We're only assessing red to amber at the moment. We have had a few groups submit the yellow one, but we're pausing on those at the moment because obviously we don't know what's going to happen with that, and we've obviously seen the amber guidance has already changed. So so we've just parked the ones that are amber.
Yellow, yeah. I mean, it certainly, some people who had already been through the thought process for yellow, it did help them when it came to doing revised amber with the indoor bit, because obviously if you want to have the option on a really horrible rainy day to be able to shift indoors, you have to really think through and put in the risk assessment some of the mitigations, some of the hazards that you're going to have to think about. Is the space big enough? Can you actually socially distance that number of young people and adults in that space? And if you can't, then you need to reduce your size of group, not just squish them in anyway. And you know, are you going to do extra ventilating, like opening windows? Have you thought about one-way systems? You know, it's not just a tack on, oh, and by the way, we sometimes assume we'll be running indoors. You have to actually talk about how that's going to work in order to get that bit of the amber risk assessment approved as well.
Cool. Okay. Let's move on. I have just typed the question back to someone, but obviously I'm conscious we don't want to be here too long. So what's going to do, feel free to post questions. We can always go back to the COVID stuff. That's absolutely fine. Safety and risk assessments. So the rules have changed regarding what we as section leaders, and I say we as section leaders because obviously Heather and I, as well as being the district commissioner team, are also section leaders as well. So as of the 1st of September, documented risk assessments are now needed for everything we do. Now, I've made a few comments, and this has partly come from, you know, a lot of stuff that we've seen on things like Facebook. So yes, you do need to risk assess flag break, you know, and I've said to a certain extent. No, scouting hasn't gone mad. You know, some would argue that it's always been a bit mad. You know, yes, we can still have campfires, climb mountains, use scissors, all those kind of things we've always done. So risk assessments were always needed, and they've always been in the rules. So you know, probably if you go back to a version of POR from 10 years ago, it will say, you know, you have to risk assess everything you do. What's changed is that we're not always great at writing them down. And I can put my hand up as an explorer leader. You know, I always risk assess. You know, I walk into the hall and see something and think, oh, you know, that looks a bit risky. Someone's left something out that's going to impact on what I'm doing tonight, explorers. Do I always write my risk assessments? No, I don't. So what's changed is not the requirement to risk assess. What's changed is the requirement to write them down. Now, we can probably all agree that the timing of this isn't amazing, bearing in mind everything else that's going on with the need to do COVID risk assessments. But it's a change that HQ have put in place. And we can come on to more. So what we'd kind of say in terms of the risk assessments, so some of you are going to be incredibly familiar with doing risk assessments. Maybe it's a part of your job. Maybe you've done them religiously since you've become a section leader. So this is really easy for you. So what we'd say is a couple of things. First is kind of work through the process and kind of discover what the reality is rather than what you might see on Facebook. There's been so much negativity on Facebook and other social media over the last probably month predominantly about this. It's much simpler than it sounds. The term risk assessment tends to be a little bit scary, and we all kind of think, oh my God, what's a risk assessment? I don't know what I'm doing. I didn't sign up for this. But it is much simpler than it sounds, although yes, it is an extra piece of admin. And ultimately, Scouting is doing this because young people have died whilst doing Scouting activity. And in some of those cases, there were no risk assessments. And ultimately, too many adults don't do it properly. Like I said, I can hold my own hand up and say that I don't always do it properly. And it's costing Scouts a huge amount of money. So those of you that have signed up to some of the HQ briefings over probably the last 3 to 6 months will have seen them talking about the pressures on their finances. Some of that is because of things like the safety incidents that have come up and the cost of dealing with those safety incidents. There's currently a case going through the coroner's court in London where an Explorer Scout died in Wales, and the leader admin and safety and risk assessments of that were, I think, below what they should have been is probably the most diplomatic way of putting it. So that's not been the sole driver for it, that incident. This has been a kind of a gradual change over a long time. So yes, it's more admin. Yes, in some respects, it's not ideal because of the other stuff that's going on at the moment with coronavirus, but it is something we need to do, and we need to do better. Now, yep.
May I interrupt you?
Of course.
Graham Hamilton's just made an announcement, literally, just saying that there's no change. The youth sector remains unchanged and amber. No additional measures are required to comply from the National Youth Agency. So
what I did say 20 minutes ago might change any second.
1 minute ago, it's just popped up.
Do you know, I thought, Howard, you were going to say, we've gone back to red then. I would have been really depressed. I would have been like, what a waste of a time.
He's posted it on the Facebook Scouting Risk Assessments group, if you're in that.
Cool. Okay. Thank you for highlighting that, Howard.
Yes.
So I filmed, got a little video here of about 60 seconds. So of the Staying Safe and Safeguarding page on the Scout website. So I will just play the video. So it shows you some of the places where you need to go if you haven't already found this. Once again, we will share these links. So you'll see that, just try and work out where my own mouse is. Yeah, so you've got that safety option at the top. And then there's, I think, about 9 or 12 tiles with different links. So you've got plan and assessing risks, which we're going to go into now. And then you've got a whole bunch of tiles with safety tips and other stuff. And in the top left-hand corner, there's the risk assessment page. And there's nice little flow chart. There's some steps and some questions. But then if you look on the top right-hand corner, and I'll just pause it briefly, there's a downloadable risk assessment form, which is basically the same form as the COVID one. Then you've got some FAQs. Then you've got some example risk assessments, which I think I'm just going to go into now. So if you go into the example risk assessment page, you'll see that there's 7 different or 8 different risk assessments they've already created. So active games, activities outside the meeting place, adult training, cooking, craft, free time, hike, premises, and section meeting overview. So there are already, however many there were that I just read out, that will give you a really good starting point. So if you are one of those people that has either commented yourself or read someone going, oh my God, do I need to do risk assessment for flag break? Well, you know, you need to risk assess that environment and understand whether it's hazardous, but do you explicitly need to risk assess flag break? You know, that's part of what you need to consider as your risk assessment. But HQ have put a huge amount of material online to make this as easy as it possibly can be. And yes, you have to do some admin for it, but there is, as you know, lots of material. Nobody is giving you a blank sheet of paper and saying, just come up with it yourself. You know, so that's kind of the key point. There is lots of material there. But I'll just...
Ben, I think it's worth highlighting what you've just said, which is that there's very much a categorization of the types of activities where things are grouped together. So it's not that every single different game that you ever run needs a separate risk assessment if it's just another kind of active game. So all the things that apply to any active game. Now, there might be the odd game where something very unique to that game needs to be jotted down. And if you didn't notice it till the day, or it was actually halfway through, then the new requirement is just to make a handwritten note on your program, your risk assessment that was pre-populated, just to sort of keep up with it as a dynamic thing. But we always had to do dynamic, as on our toes as things would develop, but now we're being asked to jot down those observations, those dynamic adjustments that we make on the fly, and just keep a note of them.
Yes, you will see, I think, if you follow some of those links that you know, they use examples of, you know, someone quite literally scrawling it on a piece of toilet paper. You know, so although there is a nice word toilet paper, there's a nice word template there, and it's clearly structured and, you know, easy to use. You don't have to use that template. You know, it makes it easy because if you're sharing it, it's kind of a standard, and if another leader in your section goes to the page, they're going to understand. But, you know, the dynamic nature of risk assessments mean that you might turn up at your HQ one night and something's there you weren't expecting, which means that you can't type something out, print it out, you know, do all these kind of things. So there's always going to be that element of last minute risk assessing as things come up.
Absolutely, and I think that OSM is worth mentioning because they have put a new column. Those of you who may use OSM for its program planning bit, there is now a column for risk assessment alongside each element on your program that you're putting in. So again, if your group uses that and the leaders are used to sharing it, then that might work well for you.
Absolutely.
And for example, I saw on Facebook somebody sort of saying, but what about where we throw it over to the kids and they come up with a game, and that means we'll never be able to do a new invented game ever again? That's not true. It just means that in the same way that I might sit down with my beavers and sort of say, okay, beavers, how are we going to keep this next game safe? What do you think we should do when we're about to play this game? And then when they say those things, I will literally just jot those down on a bit of paper.
Yes. Or you'll have on your risk assessment, which is something like general hall games,
Yeah.
because, you know, are you going to risk assess every single piece of equipment in your hall? You know, where there might be a certain amount of crossover, possibly not. You know, you might risk assess general hall games, you know, where you're going to talk about distancing and throwing things at each other, and maybe some of the risks in your hall. You know, if you've got, I don't know, shelves or any sharp objects in your hall, you know, they're always going to be applicable for your risk assessment. But what I'll do is I'll move on to the next slide, because I've got 2 slides with about 4 points on, really to talk you through the process. So this isn't, you know, me or Heather and I telling you must do it this way. This is just a suggestion if you're starting from a place where you're not sure where to go. Firstly, get a clipboard, print a few of the blank templates off, and your section leader team, you know, visit your HQ if you can. And obviously, if your HQ is currently shut down because the church or whoever your landlord is doesn't let you go in, then you can't do that. But if you can pop down to your HQ one evening, then do that. Now walk through the HQ and talk and look at what you and the young people do from arrival to departure, because obviously it's not just about what you run as a section leader, it's, are there any risks once they've entered your premises? So do you have a car park? You know, can parents drive into your car park, and is there a risk that they might run over the beavers that are waiting outside? You know, so you need to consider those kind of things as well. You know, are there risks of intruders coming into your HQ? You know, if you don't have an outer perimeter you can seal, is there a risk that someone might come into your building, and is that something you need to consider? But yeah, so just walk through the HQ, look at the risks that are inherent in a lot of buildings. You know, is there a glass door? Is there a shelf? Is there a fire exit sitting at the head height of a beaver? You know, all these kind of things that you probably think about when you're in the hall, but, you know, put them on the clipboard so that you can then think about how you're going to mitigate it. And then, yes, what are the risks? And then think about the regular activities and games. So if you play, I'm trying to think of an example of a game that you might play. Let's just say you play football. Obviously, you know, we would all say don't play football every week, but just for the sake of argument, let's say you play football every single week. You can think about the risks from playing football and other similar games, and then build that into your risk assessment. And then how do you mitigate them? So if there is that fire exit that's at head height, can you take the fire exit down when you turn up at the start of beavers, put it in a safe place, and then when you finish beavers, can you put it back? Is that the mitigation? Or are you going to ask one of your leaders or a young leader to stand next to the fire extinguisher whenever you're playing a game, so that they're a human barrier? You know, if there's a glass door, you know, can you speak to your chair or your group scout leader and say, can we board up this glass? You know, some of these things you just want to fix, you know, and make them no longer be a risk. Obviously, some of these things you won't be able to do, but it's really about, you know, how can you mitigate them, or can you not? You know, are there risks which are so dangerous that actually you can't do that activity anymore? And maybe you have been doing it in the past, but now that you've actually risk assessed it, you've kind of thought to yourself, well, actually, you know, maybe I've been sailing a bit close to the wind, and in hindsight, you know, we need to do something different. And then type it up. So if you've gone down there with a clipboard and you're just scrawling notes, go and type it up, so that if your handwriting is anything like me and it's almost illegible, then, you know, it's standardized. Share it with your group scout leader so that they can both sanity check it and give it an informal approval. Obviously, if they're part of that leader team, then it's always good to give it to someone else who isn't part of that team to say, have I missed anything? You know, does this make sense? Have I gone too far? Have I not gone far enough? You know, a little bit like with the COVID ones, you know, you need to find the balance between, you know, not turning it into an encyclopedia that no one's ever going to read because it's so long. So yeah, so share it with your group scout leader or your chair or your treasurer or whoever you have, who kind of walks the hall and looks at it and goes, yes, you know, you've done a good job. You know, if you want either Heather or me or one of the ADCs to come down and do that for you, then, you know, the timetable permitting, we're always happy. Share it with your leaders, your young leaders, and your parent helpers. There's no point in having a risk assessment if the only person that knows about it is the primary section leader or the group scout leader. So if all you do is put it in a file on your computer and don't show anyone, then you might as well not bother doing the bit beforehand. It's really important that everyone knows. And actually, I think this is one of the drivers for documenting it, because I think once again, HQ are aware that lots of leaders do them, but do they always share those risks with the rest of the team? You know, and if you've got a parent rota and you've got a parent that comes down once every 6 weeks, do they understand the risks in that hall? And do they understand their role in reducing them? Maybe that's not for them. And then follow it. Almost the most important bit. Once again, there's no point doing it and go to all that hard work if you just ignore it and think, well, I know that activity is really dangerous and it's a hospital visit waiting to happen, but the kids love it, so we're just going to carry on doing it anyway because that's scouting and we don't think we should be stopping these kind of activities. But if you can't make it safe, then you shouldn't be doing it. And then review it on a regular basis. This is another really important thing for risk assessments. If you stick them away and every 5 years, you know, your district commissioner or someone comes down and says, "Can I see your risk assessments?" and you dust them off, then there's no point in doing them. You have to review them and update them where necessary as either new activities come along or new risks come along, or if there are one-off activities. Obviously, a lot of you are tenants and have got no control over what happens in your hall. So if you're in a church hall and the church go and put something on the wall that now becomes a risk, you need to put it in the risk assessment and update the risk assessment, because those things are dynamic and you can't control them. might only be here for a week. They might be doing some decorating, and there's a scaffolding tower set at the end of the hall. So you might not change the written version. You might just do something a bit more temporary. But yeah, keep an eye on it, and don't just make it become a dead document. And as Heather said, OSM has now got a section against the program, I believe it is, for risk assessments. So upload them and then everyone can see them. And then, you know, these are not the COVID ones. So the district does not need to see them. County does not need to see them. HQ does not need to see them. And Bear Grylls does not need to see them. So we care about them deeply, but we don't need to see them. We just need to know that they're being done. And obviously we might pop down one evening and, you know, we might be coming down to present a young person with their Chief Scouts Gold Award, and we might say, oh, you know, whilst we're here, can we have a quick look at your risk assessments? And obviously that's part of our role to do that, but we don't need you to send them to us as you do them. You know.
Yeah, so basically it is the GSL and the exec of each group who are sort of entrusting their leaders and can have whatever system they want to have in place, whether they are once it's all set up, they sort of leave you to it, or they may in the initial getting used to this want to sort of be more involved. But it is a GSL and group exec responsibility.
Yeah. And then you've got until January 2021 for this. So this guidance changed. I think it was the 1st of September this requirement came in. But yes, you've got 3 months to actually go through the process of putting these things in place. You know, and like we said, you know, the system you have is by and large up to you. I think it's best to use the HQ template. I don't think you need to complicate things. You know, but, you know, if you want to tweak it slightly and make it fit your group, that's absolutely fine. Don't make it harder. You know, if you see someone on Facebook talking about health and safety standards or how they're not good enough, well, that's their opinion. You know, if HQ, who are ultimately policing this and who are ultimately going to decide if something's been done to the right standard, have given us the template, just use that one. You know, and in terms of their examples as well, you know, use that as a tone and a standard, shall we say, for what's being done. Don't make life harder on yourself.
Yes, and I mean, having this transition phase doesn't mean we can just all forget about it till January. We've got to get used to doing it, and it is a learning situation. So we have got this term to do it. No, Mark, no, they don't have to be printed out. If you have a system of sharing them on phones or iPad or whatever, you know, it can be typed. And again, the dynamic bit could be typed onto a device. So it could be handwritten, you know, by contrast typed. You know, as long as it's written down and taken out of brains onto either a screen or a piece of paper.
And shared is the key thing.
Shared is the key thing. And I just wanted to say, for example, that for most of us, this doesn't really kick in, or it doesn't seem to kick in until we're back doing some face-to-face. But there are aspects where it's worth practicing this and getting used to it, even with Zoom meetings. So for example, just the other week, I was doing a scavenger hunt with my beavers and my young leader was running it, and it suddenly occurred to me, oh, I ought to have a written risk assessment for this. So I sent him a quick email, said, can you please jot down and email me back what you think the hazards are that we ought to mention and to mitigate. And he did that, and then did a very good 2-sentence briefing to the beavers before he ran the scavenger hunt to keep them a bit safer and remind them not to go so fast that they would trip over and hurt themselves.
Yes, absolutely. And you know, it's important to get young leaders involved as well, because we're hoping they're all going to be leaders of the future. But yes, that's so that's like what I'd call normal risk assessments. But as I said on the COVID slide, don't mix the two. So if you're putting together a normal risk assessment, leave all the COVID stuff out of it, and the same for the other one. The COVID one, don't talk about your normal risks. And the COVID risk assessment is just, you know, mitigating the meeting face to face and not spreading coronavirus. But yeah, keep them separate, because otherwise, once again, it just makes things a little bit more complex if you try and put them together, and they just become much longer and much harder for everyone. Yeah, keep them separate. So that's normal risk assessments. So almost the final bit on the safety thing is, so this is another HQ change that they're encouraging the district commissioners to take on. So all activities away from your normal meeting place or that require a permit do have to be notified to the district commissioner team for approval. So so this could be that you are going to Hoak to take part in some kayaking. So you need to notify the district commissioner team, and we've created a form on the website. For those of you that have ever seen the campsite form, it's a very similar looking form. There's a notification form there where you can go on and you can let us know what you're doing. That's the URL at the bottom. I don't have a video of it, unfortunately. So this is only when you're away from your normal meeting place. So whenever you're in your own HQ, you need to risk assess it and you need to have that, but you don't need to share it for us. This is if you are going, like I said, you're going to Hoak, or you are, let me think of another example. Maybe you're doing a night hike, maybe at Stoke, or maybe you're going to Pakar for a day and you're going to be using the Pakar activities. And then you need to notify us that you're doing that. And yes, that does include the park. Now, obviously, if you're doing COVID risk assessment, which are kind of telling us you're going to the park, you've kind of ticked that box anyway. And this is where some of this stuff has kind of all come at the same time, which makes it all slightly messy. But yes, that notification form will probably take you about 60 seconds to fill out. So it's very, very quick. And there aren't that many mandatory forms.
I think the only group that might not need to tell us when they go to the park is First Link North, because they're actually in the park.
Yes, that is true. Yes, so if you're First Link North and you are walking out of the front door of your hut, then you don't need to tell us that, because as Heather says, you are in your hut. But like I said, the form, we've tried to make it as simple as possible, because we don't want you to you to spend lots of time doing admin. And yes, what we said is let us know 7 days for activity. And also if you're doing an activity that requires a permit, which once again is normally when you're going to be away from your place, your normal HQ. Yeah, so Tim, that is separate from nights away. So yeah, this isn't nights away activities, this is just all activities. There is a separate nights away form. So if you were doing a nights away activity and you're going away on summer camp for a week and you're going to be doing abseiling whilst you're on summer camp, you do not need to give us both the activity notification and the nights away notification, because some of that is addressed in the nights away notification. So you don't need to do both in those situations. But obviously we're kind of going to learn from these, and if we find that we're asking too much, or the frequency is the notification period is either too short or too long, then we'll tweak this as we go, because we've never had to do this. So this is a new requirement on the district commissioner team. So we're trying to find the right balance between Heather and I not drowning in emails, because we're going to get an email every time you notify one. And obviously we already get plenty of scout emails and work emails and family emails, so we're trying to find a balance. So so we will tweak this and refine it as we move on. And obviously, as we're kind of not doing much face-to-face scouting at the moment, we're not going to expect many notifications. So yes, wait for approval. We will try and get back as quickly as possible. So this isn't a panel thing. So, if that email comes through, Heather or I will, approve it ourselves. We're not going to have a weekly meeting.
Ben, Laura has asked, what if we decide last minute to go to the park because the weather's nice?
That's a good question, isn't it? Because yes, once again, good question. I'll tell you what, Laura, let's take that one away. So Heather and I will discuss this, because
I think, it might be, depending on whether it would just be simply a matter of making sure that you WhatsApped me or Ben, just so that if it was a spur of the moment thing, or you had decided before you actually head out, just to make sure that you're letting us know. I mean, but we will need to have a bit of a think about that to see if we can come up with something a bit neater.
Yes, because like I said, we don't want a huge admin burden, because like I said, we've got enough already, and we don't want to add to your admin burden. But yes, this is a change that HQ have put in place in terms of the district commissioner being more involved in approving those types of activities where people are not in their normal meeting place. I suspect maybe it's because maybe there's an increase in accidents, but I'm not completely sure, to be honest with you, what the background is.
Can I ask, so if I risk assessment a trip to the park that we normally do, and I'm not there and my club leader just decides it because the weather's been nice, he has to text me and then I have to email you or text you to ask for permission.
Well, and that's what we're trying to think through, because we don't want to make it cumbersome, but we're just trying to get a situation where we as DCs have information that we need to be aware that people are out and about rather than in the HQ. Because if something happens, you know, we need to be already aware of where people are.
Yes, but we'll take that one away because you know, you've made a valid point there, Laura. So yeah, so we'll take that one away rather than Heather and I debating it here, because so yes, that's the safety and safeguarding or risk assessment changes. You know, so as we said, yes, you know, that it does increase the formal admin, but hopefully it's one of those things that's done kind of now-ish, you know, and you work through getting yourself up to date, and then moving forward it's more of a kind of a tweaking and a reviewing thing. Or I suspect obviously a lot of you are going to have written risk assessments already, so it's just filling in those gaps where you don't have them, you know, and then it becomes a much easier task, because it's, you know, it's like when there's some big change at work and you just dread the admin that comes from it. But yeah, so we don't want it to be like that. That's why we say keep it simple. So we are almost on to our last slide, and we'll be going about an hour. So okay, so a couple of other things that people might have seen. Safety and that's meant to say safety and safeguarding training, so that's a typo. So safety and safeguarding training was included in module 1, which is the essential information training module. So what that meant is if you had a new adult and they did module 1, then they would also from that get safety and safeguarding training ticked off. Because there were some gaps in how that delivered the safety and safeguarding training, that module's now been separated. So if you do module 1 as a brand new member, you on top of that have to do safety and safeguarding. You'll probably see there's a theme to a lot of the HQ changes, which is making safe scouting safer. You know, and once again, a lot of this comes back to what HQ are seeing. So yeah, so if you do module 1, now obviously I think everyone on this call has done module 1 and has done safety and safeguarding. So it's almost more, if you have new leaders, they will have to go and do a separate module. There's a few other training changes as well in terms of how they're restructuring things, which I don't have all the information for, but there's some other things. And then
Ben, sorry, I forgot to say earlier, I'm so sorry, it's hard to jump in. The safety and safeguarding and module 1 from here on in only exist as online modules. There is no face-to-face version for these, never mind COVID. I've just stopped delivering them that way. So as and when, or if you have leaders who find difficulty in accessing online materials, we have been promised workbook versions, or it might entail somebody having to sort of sit down with them at a screen to sort of enable them to cope with the technology. But you know, they are sort of aware that the workbooks might be needed for some people, but in the general way of things, it's going to be the online version for module 1, in all cases, safety and safeguarding.
yes, thanks. I think it might be the 12th of September they're splitting them. I think. But yes, don't.
It's
quote me on
certainly
that.
later. It's certainly later than I thought, because it certainly didn't happen on the 1st, which is I had misremembered. So yeah,
Yes.
it must be sometime.
And then the second thing is that HQ have aligned the time periods for first aid and safety and safeguarding. So some of you will know that when you do your first aid, it lasts for 3 years, but safety and safeguarding lasts for 5 years. So they are aligning those. So they are changing safety and safeguarding to be 3 years as well. Now, if you've done your safety and safeguarding any time in probably the last 2.5 years, this probably doesn't impact you too much, or maybe 2 years. But what they are doing, I think it's in the next couple of weeks, they are essentially resetting the expiry date for anyone that has done safety and safeguarding training. So all of a sudden, if you did your safety and safeguarding training 3 years ago or more, you will need to redo it earlier than you may have expected. So they're aligning the periods. And I think there's a 12-month transition for that. So you will have time to get through those. You know, you're not going to be removed from scouting on when they've changed the system. But yes, it will now be 3 years. So it makes it much easier, because there was always this confusing thing when you were trying to remember how long mandatory training lasts. One's 5 years and two are 3 years. So it was a bit inconsistent. And obviously, once again, that push to make scouting safer. They obviously want people to do it more regularly, rather than it being something that you do and then you kind of forget about it. Because let's be honest, trying to remember a training course 5 years later, unless it's part of your regular day-to-day job, is probably something that most of us will not do. So yeah, they've changed that to 3 years. But I believe,
Ben,
yeah.
can I ask? I forgive me, because I'm not 100% sure if I remember this correctly, but I know that they've at the same time as this module 1 split from safety and safeguarding, module 1E no longer exists. So executive members are now going to be asked to do module 1 like everybody else. And then there is a top-up sort of mini module, which is sort of for trustees. And it's actually quite good, because it means if you're a leader and you've done ordinary module 1, but now you're starting to get more involved in the exec, you can just do a very short little top-up thing. But it will be needed for anybody who takes on being on their executive committee, either as an ex officio or as an optional section leader who has chosen to take up that option. And yes, I think, Ben, the bit I can't remember is, I think that executive officers and members have to do safety and safeguarding now that it's been split.
Yes, I think you're right. Yes. So obviously there's a big push to help people know what they need to do the role that they've got. So we know that some people become trustees or move on to the exec, and perhaps the training they get or the briefing they get isn't always as clear as it should be, and maybe they don't always understand what their obligations are, or, that they do have some kind of legal responsibilities. So now at the point that cub leader says, yes, I'm going to move on to the exec, you'll send them the executive training bit, and then that's all they need. So yeah, so hopefully that will mean that they feel more confident in terms of what they're doing. But that's that. And then, as I said earlier, so we had our Amber risk assessment for Walter Davis approved on whatever day it was. Was it yesterday? I can't remember now. So we are hoping to run activity sessions for you to book your Beavers, Cubs or Scouts on. So you will be able to take 15 or whatever the numbers at that time, down to do archery or whatever. Our challenge at the moment is that we don't have many permitted instructors. So we're trying to work out how we can run activity sessions whilst the weather's still reasonably decent, with the limited instructors we've got. I'm talking to some of the PACCAR people to see if we can share PACCAR's instructors, in cases where we don't have our own. So yeah, so we're hoping to get that information out as soon as possible. Obviously, if you are someone that has got a permit on the archery or rifle, you can bring your own young people when you use the range. And there's a few loose ends in terms of making it COVID secure. A few things that are arriving in the post this week. But yes, you will be able to use it. And as I said, you can book it for your own section leaders. So if you want to do pioneering, we do have pioneering poles. We don't have ropes. Well, we've got ropes, but apparently they were rotted. But I'm going to try and look to get a new set of ropes. But yeah, so you could come down to Stoke. You could do pioneering activity, or you could do a patrol tent pitching activity. Obviously, with social distancing and those other things, you could do a wide game. You could do all these kind of things. If you wanted to meet face to face, but you couldn't do it every week, or you just decided to do it, at the weekends. And once again, that's obviously completely dependent on your adult team. With that, you can book that just through the normal campsite booking screen. So if you want to use Walter Davis for your own session, just go to the campsite booking screen. Don't know if you missed it, Howard asked earlier about the cost. We've got a district exec meeting tomorrow, so I will speak to the exec about whether we will charge for section leaders to just come down and use the field. I suspect probably not, but obviously that's not a decision for either Heather or myself to make. But yes, I'd be surprised if we do, if all you're doing is using the field. Okay, so that is it. One last piece. Any questions on any of that stuff first? Oh, yeah. Oh, so yeah, so yes, you do need risk assessments if you're going to either Packard or Walter Davis, but we will share the Walter Davis one. So ultimately, most of your risk assessment for COVID will be the Walter Davis one. There might just be some extra elements in terms of communication, but yes, that'll form the basis of your risk assessment. And so finally, some team news, and so this is a personal announcement here. So some of you know that although I'm Ealing born and bred, actually moved out of the London Borough of Ealing an amazing 7 years ago now, and have continued commuting from North Hertfordshire to Ealing on however many nights a week that I might do scouting. And the time has come for me to draw that to an end. So I'm sure you may be able to appreciate that if you drive away from Hanwell at 10:30 at night and it's an hour journey home, and then you're back up at work for 6ish the next morning, that does take its toll, and also takes its toll on one's family. So I am stepping away from Ealing and Hanwell and ultimately Greater London Middlesex West in April 2021. So I am, yes, leaving scouting. And I'm pausing because it actually makes it sound weird for me to say this, because I've been an Ealing and Hanwell scouter for 22 years or whatever it is now. So so yes, it actually yeah, that's why I'm pausing, because it actually feels a bit weird to say out loud. But yeah, so as of April next year, I believe probably St George's Day will be my last event as both a district commissioner for Ealing and Hanwell, and also a scouter for Ealing and Hanwell. Now what that means in practice is that I'm going to save on some petrol, and what it also means is that Heather and my priority, well, one of our priorities for the next 6 months or so, is to find a replacement for myself. The district commissioner team, I think, has worked well for Ealing and Hanwell. It means that burden of everything that the district commissioner is expected to do is spread over 2 people. Obviously, there were 3 of us, and we've not been successful in finding a 3rd person, but we don't want to go back to it being just one person, and it would be incredibly difficult for Heather to take on that role. Yes, very much almost our top priority is to find a 2nd and ideally a 3rd person, because even with Heather and myself, it's still quite difficult. I won't lie, there is plenty for us to do. I think being virtual has possibly made it slightly easier, because I can come home and have a meeting like this, whereas normally I would have driven to Ealing for work and then got home about 11:30 at night. So in some respects, my elements of my scouting have been made slightly easier. But yeah, so we will so we need to find someone to join the team. That's the bottom line. And also from an explorer point of view, so our team of explorer adults you know, it's a fantastic team, but, you know, we need to recruit more people into that to pick up what I do as an explorer leader. The intention wasn't, when I took on the district commissioner role 2.5 years ago, I think it was, to still be being an explorer leader, but hey, sometimes these plans don't quite work. So yeah, so that's also my focus, to both build the explorer leader team, so Brigantia and everything that they've done over the last 12 years or whatever continues to grow and develop, and that also the district generally grows and develops. But yes, that's kind of it really. But yeah, obviously I'm here for 6 months, whatever it is. So I will still be reviewing your pay rises for at least the next 6 months. So yeah, you have to be careful.
And I mean, obviously, you know, I am, you know, gutted, and you know, but I always, I understand, and I've known for a bit longer, obviously, because Ben kindly shared his plans with me, and I just want to make it clear, I really don't want to attempt to go solo, and I don't believe I would be able to go solo, and that really isn't an option that's on the table. And you know, it is, you know, I would if I could. So please, I'm hoping that we can build a new team, and I would love to be part of it. I really would. I really enjoy being a part of the DC team. It's been very rewarding for me, and I've grown and gained a lot of new skills, and I would like to keep doing it, but I can only do it if I'm part of a team. I can't go solo.
Yeah. And that's also the way we want to move forward. You know, it's, I think, you know, if you're, you know, if you don't work, you know, and you've got no family commitments, then possibly, you know, you can just about do it solo, and even then I think it's a sizable job. But I think, you know, if you have a job and family commitments, then it's basically impossible to do it solo. So yeah, so we're going to be looking, you know, we know that we've got loads of incredible adults in Ealing and Hanwell. Now, unfortunately, they've all got other roles. You know, that's the one downside. You know, none of those incredible adults that we know about are sitting at home twiddling their thumbs waiting for a call from Heather or I or Richard Williams, the county commissioner. So, but, you know, we're going to be calling some of you. We might be withholding our number, so you don't see my number or Heather's number and think, oh, I know what that call is going to be. You know, but yes, we do need to reach out to some of you to invite you onto the team. You know, and maybe in some cases, you know, you should have always been there. But anyway, let's move on to questions, because we have gone past the time, and I'm conscious that it's another Scouting night. So are there any questions that haven't been dealt with on the chat?
And just say thanks for doing a great job.
Oh, thank you.
So yeah, so thank you for your kind words, those of you that are posting them. You want the pay rise, that's all I can say. But yeah, no, it's going to be really strange. That's the one thing. I mean, some of you will know that I do too much in Scouting. My wife certainly knows that. But yes, it already feels slightly strange to not know what next year's going to be like. And I know with COVID, we're kind of all like that anyway. You know, we don't know what next year's going to be like. But I'm so used to looking ahead and thinking, oh, well, what's the next Explorer thing we're going to do, or what's the next district thing we're going to do? But yeah, actually, it's Hitchin, Holly. So the funny thing is, when I say I don't know what I'm going to do, I am actually already signed up for
sorry.
Hitchin. So yeah, so I live in Hitchin, which is North Hart. So the one thing I do know that I'm going to do is I'm going to Lockenhead Scout Activity Centre in Scotland next year, because Hertfordshire, they own that centre, and Hitchin district go there every 4 years. So the one thing I do know is that next summer I will be in Hitchin's district summer camp or summer activity, but I don't have a role, so I don't know what that's going to be. I just know that I'm going to be in Scotland for 10 days. But yes,
Maybe.
and I'm just hoping the weather's good. Yeah, so that's it. So if no one's got any other questions, so yeah, what we'll do is we'll send the slides out, and with that we'll send some of the links in terms of some of the things we talked about. But yeah, thank you very much for everything you do, you know.
Yeah.
And once again, please share that with your leaders. So if you are a Group Scout leader, well, just everyone, so yeah, if you're a Group Scout leader or an ADC or whatever your role is, do thank the people that are continuing to provide scouting week after week. And actually, although not commuting into Ealing makes some Zoom meetings a bit easier, Zoom scouting in many respects isn't easy. Do stay in touch with your team, do thank them, do make sure that they're aware of how grateful Heather and I, Richard Williams, County Commissioner, HQ are for everything that all those leaders are doing under crazy circumstances. And also do say to them, it will get better, we are undoubtedly going to lose some adults because of coronavirus. We are undoubtedly going to lose some kids because of coronavirus, not in the way that coronavirus, not in the death way, but, because they decide that actually, scouting's not for them anymore, but yes, the more that we can keep them involved, the more that we can show them that we need them, and the young people certainly need scouting, then the better.
Yes,
so
and absolutely, and as we all know, and thank you everybody who's taken the time to join us this evening. I hope you felt it was worthwhile just to rattle through some of those key points and just try and make sure we're all on the same page. We are Ealing, we are doing our scouting here in Ealing, and we are sort of conscious of the responsibility that we have in this local area for doing it right. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if any of the rest of you saw Tim Kidd's closing little video at the end of the Gilwell reunion at the weekend. He got quite choked up at the end because he cares so passionately about what scouting can offer to the young people and how important it is and how valuable it is. And it may feel a bit cheesy, but I get that passion and I share that passion, and I hope we all can tune in to why we're doing this and why it's important, because it's not just a little add-on, it's really got so much to offer the young people.
Yes, and us as leaders as well. We do it because we love it.
Yeah.
But cool, well, thank you very much. Thank you all for your hard work. And yes, we will let you go. And yes, we look forward to those COVID risk assessments if you've not yet had a chance to do one. And yes, we will see you later. Thanks for joining, Lee.
Bye.